My name is Michael Howard, and I've got the tremendous privilege, honour, and good fortune to be writing a study of Theodore Major, this extraordinary artist that we're here to celebrate today. And obviously I'm trying to do the best I can. And you've just caught me having really written the first biographical stretch of what will be a 2-volume production. And honestly, it's going to be absolutely amazing because you can see the evidence around you. Theodore Major was a great artist who will be genuinely up there with the greats of 20th century and even perhaps European art. As ever, the proof is in the pudding, and the pudding is around you in these paintings. What I'm going to try and do is give you some background information, but also a sense of what it is to look at a painting. Now, obviously, when you look at a painting like these here today, it's like a window opening into another world. No, it's not. It's not a window. It's a doorway. And you step through that doorway. You give the painting time, and you walk into the painting. And as you walk into the painting, you cross time and space and go into that very special place where human beings talk to each other, where generations, time distance, time past, talk to each other. And they talk about what it is to be human, what it is to be me, and what it is to be you, living in the world that we live in. And this is the reason why I think Theo, I'm going to call him Theo because that's what he wanted to be called, and that's how he was known. That's what Theo wanted. Theo wanted to create an art that connected with the world, that connected with people's lives. And in an age like ours, which is so difficult, so complex, no more, no less so than perhaps Theo's own, Theo, I believe, has got the chance to be the artist of the 20th century. Now, I know there's Picasso, I know there's Matisse, but this is, I'm from Liverpool, so this hurts a bit, a kind of Lancashire lad. He is a man from Wigan, and he paints in this part of the world. And he reaches out to a huge audience, I'm sure, once we get him out there. And every artist needs a hero. And the particular hero for Theo is that man there, who really has organised the whole thing. He's helped with the book and everything, and he's got this act together. And he's done it from absolute love. And I know that because we've travelled the same journey together with Theo. So all these fantastic works are really, genuinely, from Martin at Collect Art at Lim. That is the heart, really, honestly, of the regeneration of interest in Theo's work. That's where the heart beats, with us two, and then the people we've met on the way, which I hope I'll be able to talk about a little bit later on. So, how do we do it? Well, first of all, we enter into this picture. And you can enter into a picture just for sheer delight. The colour, the textures, the emotions that are on the canvas. But there are many other ways. The thing about a painting is that it lives with you. You can hang it on your wall. Now, Theo, I'm going to be careful about this because Theo had interesting ideas about people hanging his work on the wall. Very odd. But when you own a picture, when you have a picture with you, you see it change through the day. And I know of no other artist, except Titian and Rembrandt and a few others like that, whose work lives with you through the day, whose colours and shadows shift and change. And so exploring a Theo painting is an ever-changing discovery. So that's the immediacy of Theo's paintings. It's there to be seen. Theo had no quality control. And I mean that in the best Spinal Tap way. He really didn't. Most artists shrink from doing some of the things that he did. He didn't. He painted from the heart, from the soul. So, my job as an art historian is to try, in some kind of way, to reach into the times in which he lived, his character as far as I can find it out, and to enrich our experience of his paintings. And believe me, as I hope you'll find out in a few minutes' time, it's been the most extraordinary journey. So, without further ado, let's kick into what we're here for. Theo was born in 1908 and he died in 1999. He is a close contemporary of L.S. Lowry, and I've written a major book on L.S. Lowry, and I was very involved with the setting up of the Lowry. And these two guys, these two chaps, should be thought of as Van Gogh and Gauguin, Michelangelo and Raphael, Picasso and Matisse. We could argue also perhaps Ron Kittai and David Hockney. We might even argue like Al and Al. These are artists who work together, whose work should be seen perhaps in symbiotic relationships. They both say something very important about what it is to be alive in this present age. Theodore Major and L.S. Lowry, I'm not scared. Lowry thought Theo was a much better painter, and guess what? Theo agreed. That he was a much better painter than Lowry. And Lowry, I mean, you know, won't go on about that. So here's this artist that Lowry thought was much better than him. Why didn't he succeed in the way that Lowry succeeded? Frankly, because he would not sell out. He would not sell the image of the North to people in the South who would then kind of see it as some chintzy, sentimental, nostalgic thing, which of course has happened yet again with Mr. Lowry and that bloody awful film. Is that video running? Yeah. That bloody awful film that set Lowry back. Anyway, forget that, but we're here to talk about Theo. So let's just do that and see what happens. Some of you might notice what this is. Some of you might have seen it. It's in Wigan Town Hall, as you walk up the big steps. But Wigan Town Hall used to be the technical college, and it's where Theo trained and taught for 20 odd years. And as you walk up the steps, there on a mosaic on the right is the word art. And it's in a technical college. It's in the college of mining and technology. In other words, art is part of life. It is not separate from it. And every day you imagine him walking past that and perhaps thinking, this is my calling. Now, Theo is unusual because Theo saw himself as a prophet. He saw himself as somebody shouting from the mountaintops, or from the Lancashire Plain, if you like, shouting out, telling people what the world is really about. And he based his life, unbelievably, on William Blake, Van Gogh, Rembrandt, Michelangelo, and Jesus Christ. But not necessarily in that order. So he is someone who's really preaching, as Van Gogh did. Van Gogh said, I cannot preach in a church because they won't let me, so I preach the gospel in paint. And that is what Theo did. And quoting William Blake, would to God that all the Lord's people were prophets. In other words, shouting out what you believe in. And in the 1950s, Theo had that moment, as many artists do, when it seemed that his career was made. The very well-respected critic John Berger wrote a piece in which he said, Theo's canvases deserve to hang amongst those of the best artists of our time. But because Theo didn't play the game, he didn't go down to London as he should have done, he didn't do what was expected of him, so of course you lose that place in culture. And it's only, again, whether Theo likes it or not, dealers, art lovers like Martin and people who buy the work, who spread it around, people like me who write books, that the work goes out there. Whether Theo would have agreed with this or not, you will have to judge for yourself. So here is a life mask, I hope you can see it, of William Blake, the great romantic poet of freedom and energy. And you can see that there is an extraordinary and uncanny likeness between the great romantic artist and Theo, which he absolutely relished. And he read poetry, he knew Wordsworth particularly and William Blake. And so we can kind of weave these things together to see this artist finding a kind of depth of purpose in late 20th century art, which actually I think is unparalleled. 1908 to 1999, that's the 20th century. How many artists have genuinely spanned that period with a knowledge that we're going to see Theo working with through his lifetime? You can see it round here. Paintings of every kind and every sort, but all from the heart and all about living a good life, so to speak. Here's wonderful William Blake. I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's. I will not reason nor compare. My business is to create. Theo is not taking nonsense from anybody. He paints from the heart. Well, he was born, obviously, in Wigan, and he belonged to an ordinary family, no real money. His mum worked in the mills, and his father was an overseer. So there was money, but there was a big family, 7 children, and Theo was the youngest. So times were never easy for Theo. This was a sort of difficult time for him in various ways. And of course, living in Wigan at that time was a thriving industrial centre with coal mines and mills working. And here is a sort of late 19th century description of Wigan. The whole district is unpicturesque, bare and open, occupied for the most part by collieries, mine shafts and pit banks. There are, however, fields where some crops are raised, potatoes and oats surviving the smoke of the environs. Pastures are scattered about also. The soil is clay and loam, over coal measures and stone. These paintings are painted in that place. The mines run underneath his feet, so to speak. The fire within. Theo, like Alanal, brings that fire out into the public and spreads it on his canvases. This is the mill in which his family worked, his mum and dad, William Brown and nephews. And you'll see that those chimneys will become a leitmotif. Can you see there on the right-hand side? Running through his art. For Theo, the past was present. Childhood, like Marcel Proust and many other people, including ourselves, childhood is desperately important to who and what we are. So here's a painting, a quintessential sort of Theo factory scene, which, like Lowry, shows that he's painting what he knows. He is not born in the south of France. I still curse the fact that I'm writing about, no, I'm not. I'm very happy to write about Lowry and Theo and living in this part of the world, but I started my career in the south of France talking about Matisse and Picasso. So I know what it's like to be in a touristy, beautiful place. He came here, and like David Hockney going to Yorkshire, he found the beauty of it and gave it to us. A beauty that otherwise, perhaps we might not see in the same way. Who knows? So, he, in a way, has become, to the popular mind, trapped within that image of an industrial painter. But one of the great things Martin has been able to do today is show you something of the full range of his work. The future beckons. Well, of course, it was the pits or the mills. But Theo was a very sickly child. Before he was 21, he nearly died 3 times from various ailments. He worked in a tailor's, I think I know which tailor's, but I'm not sure, in Wigan, but for about 3 years. And then his ill health made him have to give it up. So he was unemployable. His family rallied round, helped him to go to art school in the evenings and eventually full time. He did this and won the Governor's Medal. He was so brilliant. And that's a Governor's Medal for the whole Technical Mining Institute. He got the prize. And with that prize came a teaching contract. And Theo taught in Wigan's School of Art, now the Town Hall, for about 20 years, retiring, leaving in 1950. So although he often said he didn't have any training, we have to say, maybe not, but you were in that institution. So he worked in that sort of heartland that was the technical college. Unlike Lowry, unlike many artists, Theo was talented. Lowry wasn't. Lowry couldn't draw or paint to save his life. He made the best of a very limited talent, and that best was fantastic. He's different. He is talented. He did this when he was about 13. It's a copy of a painting by Breton Rivière. So he's talented. He's a bit like Turner. He's got it coming out of his fingers. This man can draw and paint. And so it's not a matter of can I draw and paint? It's a matter of what do I draw and paint? Here is Wigan Town Hall, as is, of course, as you'll know it. And there's the art school. Why an art school in Wigan? Well, like Manchester, you don't want to pay London prices. Train up your own designers. Train up your own creative spirit. Set fire to the fire within, which is within your own precinct. Can you see a leitmotif in this particular talk? You make the most of what you've got. You bring on that talent. You don't send it down south and bring it back. So look at those great studios. That's the art school. And there it is there. Proper Paris studio spaces with the north light. This is where Theo trained, and he was, he was talented. This is a poster that he did for the Wigan Carnival in 1929. So you can see that he's talented. He's bringing his skills to all kinds of different areas. He's teaching, and he's teaching design as much as he is teaching art. In fact, he's not really teaching art at all. There's a long story there, but he gets sidetracked, and he's not allowed to teach art, and he never forgets that. He never forgets the art school sort of betrayed him, so to speak. Interesting that in 1929, the Wigan had a monster procession. They bought the masks, the heads, the monsters from Nice Carnival. Do you know the carnival in Nice? Some of you may know that they have a huge carnival with crazy floats and huge monsters and things. Well, Wigan in 1932 hired those monsters. Theo would have seen it. And monsters, of course, play a big role, as you can see next door, in his later work. Just to show you how good he is as a designer and artist. Here's a lino cut done in 1933. It's really skillful. This man can do it. It's like a Paul Nash or any of those great artists of the 1920s. And when you look at this lino cut, you begin to realise this man, is extremely adept. This is Adam and Eve, and he would return to this motif throughout his life. Adam and Eve, the moment of being born, the moment of seeing the world as it really is, so to speak, before language gets in the way. And, of course, we've got to think of Adam and Eve and the story that follows on. There's the apple, there's these two naked lovers, there's the tree, the great phallic tree that Theo will bring into so much of his art. He was a reader of Jung, at some level. He knew about those things, as did L.S. Lowry. So the symbolism of the sun and the tree is there. And it was very much, this is the period of D.H. Lawrence. This is a period just before the Second World War, shared by Germany and Italy, of a kind of sense of blood, a sense of the people. Hopefully an era we'll never go back to, but who knows. So here is this kind of tremendous call for, the sort of intuitive response to life, and done with great skill and expertise. But it's a kind of art that could be done anywhere. This is a French artist working at the same time, and hopefully you can see it's that same sort of vague Art Deco, heroic, fascistic sort of style of art about new life, new blood, that was throughout Europe just before the outbreak of the Second World War. And just in case, I don't do it elsewhere, a bit of Liverpool. Here's Dickie Lewis standing there proud, 1956, Jacob Epstein. So Theo could have gone down all kinds of different routes. He could have gone down, this sort of avant-garde artist route that was laid out. But he didn't. He experimented. And here's a lino cut again from the 30s, where he's playing around with abstraction. I say playing around, it's not quite right. He was deadly serious. But he found that abstraction was empty, that formally it was exciting. But you find abstract elements in every good painting. Titian, Picasso, Delacroix. It's at the foundation of making a painting. But the abstract elements of line, tone, colour, texture, composition, all work in a musical way. But the thing that has to be at the centre of it is feeling. And if the feeling isn't there, if the spirit isn't there, then it's empty. So Theo couldn't take abstraction. And of course this meant that he was always difficult. He knew he lived in Wigan. Now, there's a lot of writing there, but I want it there, you don't have to read it, but I want it there because in the 1930s, 1936, of course, George Orwell was in Wigan. And he was writing one of the most important texts of the 20th century. Google it and you will find out. There's more academic writing about the road to Wigan Pier, published a year later in 1937, than almost any cultural phenomenon of the 20th century. Because is this fake news? Or is it news and journalism or historical fact or personal experience used for a greater end. You might know this piece of writing. The train bore me away, said George Orwell, through the monstrous scenery of slag heaps, chimneys, piled scrap iron, foul canals, paths of cindery mud, crisscrossed with prints of clogs. As we moved slowly through the outskirts of the town, we passed row upon row of little grey slum houses running at right angles to the embankment. At the back of one of these houses, a young woman was kneeling on the stones, poking stick up a leaden waste pipe, which ran from the sink inside and which I suppose was blocked. I had time to see everything about her, her sacking apron, her clumsy clogs, her arms reddened by the cold. She looked up as a train passed, and I, a tourist, don't forget, he's leaving Wigan, I saw her in that face was not the ignorant suffering of an animal. She knew well enough what was happening to her, understood as well as I did how dreadful a destiny it was to be kneeling there in the bitter cold on the slimy stones of a slum backyard, poking a stick up a foul drain pipe. No wonder Wiganers hate Orwell. But they're wrong, because this is only part of what he wrote. So, here is the road to Wigan Pier. As Theo was painting in the 1930s and teaching in the Wigan School of Art, George Orwell, writing one of these primal texts of the 20th century, is in the library just over the road, about 30 yards away. And both of them are like that. Both of them are doing exactly the same thing, a plea for humanity. And a few years later, in Manchester, something happens. Of course, the Spanish Civil War has broken out in 1937, just a prelude to the Second World War, so to speak. Amazingly, Picasso's Guernica is shown in Manchester, and he goes to see it. And when he goes to see it, as well as 60 other works by Picasso, he is astounded. And this painting makes the difference, I think. This painting shows him the way. And anyone who's seen this fantastic painting in Madrid will perhaps agree. Here is art used for humanity. Here is an art to make a difference, to make a change. The cry from the mountaintop. So he sees it, and he paints this. Now, it's not the most wonderful painting in the world, but it's not meant to be. I think he painted this for fun. It's painted for, I think, an art school ball at the Wigan Art College. You can see the little mice there. And I was just talking to my wife, Gillian, who's a painter, saying, why did he put those mice in? You know, really, why did... Well, he did it because he's a human being. He's making this for, I think, an art school party, and it's meant for a bit of fun. But it's an image of a miner, someone digging the earth underneath the very soil that we are standing on at the moment. And here is George Orwell again, and I hope you don't mind me being the historian in this occasion. Here is George Orwell talking about the miners. He actually went down the mines. If there is one man to whom I feel myself inferior, it is a coal miner. All of us owe the comparative decency of our lives to poor drudgers underground, blackened to the eyes, with their throats full of coal dust, driving their shovels forward with arms and belly muscles of steel. Now, believe me, Theo wrote in exactly the same tenor about mill workers and indeed the miners. And here is Theo himself. I hope you can see him. There he is painting this picture, and I think you can see the nature of the photograph suggests it's a, it's a piece of decoration for some kind of event of some sort. Well, here he is. Well, you can't see him because he's not in this photograph, but this is where he was teaching. And amazingly, in this photograph from 1941, there's a Theo painting on the wall, and there it is. Whoops, I don't know why it's doing that. Hang on, I just gone to play again. There it is. There's a Theo painting on the left-hand side of the wall, and there it is. And this is one of the very, very few early paintings that survive. It's called Still Life, and it's of banjos and guitars. And if I do this, you can see with the amazing technology that's at my fingertips, I have managed to put in, that painting into the photograph. Do ignore the guy from Skelmersdale who's transcendental and meditating and, it seems like he doesn't need a stool to sit on. But there's the place he's at. Very staid, very ordinary, and that's the painting. Now, Theo thought of his works as experiments, not as finished works. He saw his art as a lifelong flow of creative action. So many people think of their paintings as single objects they send out into the world and sell. Theo didn't. It was more of a kind of flow, a conversation with the world, that really he wished all his life would be kept together. There he is, dressed for the Wigan Carnival, I think of 1932, and he's holding a skull. He's obviously Hamlet, he's dressed up as Hamlet, and I think his friend with those amazing trousers is dressed up, I think, as Mr. Micawber. But if you know who he might be, let me know. I think he's meant to be Mr. Micawber, but I'm not sure. There's a study of a crochet. This man can draw. You know, a bit like Ellis Lowry, but he can draw better than Lowry. He can actually do the business. He chose to draw and paint the way he did, the better to express what he had to say. Now, the key moment for Theo, and I'm sort of leaving aside his personal life because we just haven't got really time to go into that, was the opening of the Midday Studios. This was an extraordinary event. It happened in the late 40s, and it happened opposite Manchester Art Gallery, in opposition to Manchester Art Gallery. Manchester Art Gallery was too London-centric, still is. Who said that? Still is, still too much looking to the international scene and has ignored Northwest artists, and it's a really tragic thing. Maybe things will change. I think things are changing there. But that's really important. So Martin Baxendale, who had taken over from David Baxendale, who had taken over Manchester Art Gallery, was making certain moves. But Margot Ingham, an extraordinary Austro-English wonderful woman, opened up these galleries in the basement of a shoe shop just opposite. And it was meant to be oppositional to this, place of great esteem. And so we've got Lowry and Theo see this as a renaissance of Northwest art. Theo is involved in it, as is Lowry, but Theo with his heart right from the beginnings, to make a Northwest art, to bring in the talent that is around here and make it flower. And for about, 8 years, they just about managed to do it. And Lowry painted this tiny little picture to say thank you to Ned Owens and Margot, who founded this, just as it closed in 1951. Now they set up, it was a group within that called the Manchester Group, and that's Theo and Lowry and various other artists of the Northwest. And they showed in London, artists from London showed in Manchester in their galleries, and for about 6 years or however long it is, they really made a difference. It looked like something was going to happen, and then it fell apart as so many things did. But the falling apart of that was the big disaster, I think, in Theo's life, professionally speaking. He put his heart and soul into this, as did Margot, and suddenly it came to naught, and he was left on his own. On the strength of this, probably, he'd left the art college. There are other reasons too, but professionally, he'd left teaching and went on his own. And when this collapsed, there was no future. What could he do? Well, to risk embarrassing Al and Al, who are sitting here, this is just what's happening now. There's something happening in Wigan which is absolutely amazing, and it is in that tradition. So we really genuinely have something to thank Theo for. This idea of regenerating our communities through art in the broadest sense of the word. So there is building up with what's happened in Wigan just this last year, something that is making a tradition, making something that is got a lineage, got a heritage. And of course, some of you will know the Fire Within, set up in the galleries in Wigan in 2009. Bringing, as Theo would have loved, old art and new art. There is no old art. It's all contemporary. We see it here and now. And so the Egyptian mask and Ghislaine's paintings there, brought together as a single unit of human expression, of what it is to be alive, and to grow old and ill, and lose people. This is the stuff of art, as you can see around this room. And it's still happening, so we're still doing it. This is very, very important. We're not just looking at an artist here who's a one-off. We're digging him up and selling the paintings. We're dealing with a spirit, with a fire, with a tradition that goes right back and hopefully will go forward. Here is a piece of Theo's writings just to prove this point. The gentle rolling hills as woman's breasts. I see the great skies as the relationship of sky and earth. I see rain as lovemaking between sky and earth. I see the woman, man, and children like gods and goddesses. I see the women and children flying about the earth. I see the great power and character of northern people. I see the characters brought about and developed by the hardship they suffered. I see the relationship of love between man, woman, child, between child, animal, or toy. I see the relationship between insect and plant, between earth and worm, the things that live in the earth. I also see the evil and ignorance and selfishness which corrupts men's minds. I see the sun, the rain, the dramatic sky and storms. Above all, I see the beauty of children. I hear their magic voices. I see Christ in every child. These are the things I paint, and the spiritual relationship existing between these things. Art is not a reflection of nature. A reflection can never be the equal of the real thing, but an interpretation of life and the meaning of life. The North is a good place to live, a good place to work, and a good place to love. Bravo, Theo. Bravo. And go to the Wigan galleries, genuinely. There's Greta Thunberg. There's my wife's paintings, Ghislaine's paintings. There's work by other artists from Wigan. And that is the overriding message. How did that happen? But it's happened, and we mustn't let go of it. This is a very special place. Look at other artists in London, in Manchester, in Birmingham, in Edinburgh. They're not doing this. They're doing something similar, but not the same. So here is Theo, painting from the heart. And this is the kind of style he develops. It's a rich, luscious, painterly style that you can see all around us today. And I'm not trying to sell these paintings. They are made to own. They are made to have in your house, and to watch them shift and change and grow and live as we go through our lives. You can see there the way these paintings have changed in the light as it's changed through the day. Bravura brushwork, direct painting, and the guy he's painting is an extraordinary man, wonderful man called Kenneth Fleetwood, who came from Wigan. And Theo set up, when he was lost with the galleries closing in Manchester, he set up his own school, helping young children to paint. If you didn't have money, you didn't pay. And he set it up in the front room of his parents-in-law house. And Ken Fleetwood was one of those young lads who came along. And he eventually became the head designer for Hardy Amy's, designing extraordinary clothes, which I'll show you a little bit later on. He also found a fantastic model and friend and muse in Joan, who was a local lass who posed for him naked, and did so for many years without payment, and became this very, very important presence in Theo's family's life. There again, you can see this extraordinary richness of painting, direct from the tube, so to speak. He's painting like Van Gogh. His heroes are Rembrandt, Van Gogh, Vlaminck, and others, a painterly school of direct painting, spreading the colour on the palette and then putting it directly onto the painting. And of course, painting wet on wet. Now, believe me, look at these paintings. Martin might say something like this later on to me, whatever, but they're in good nick, essentially. Yeah, they're in good nick. Most 20th century artists' paintings are not very good. Just missed saying something there. Are not very good because, people have forgotten how to paint. Theo knew how to paint. Where's the cracking on these canvases? They're not. He knows wet on wet. Start thin, build up thick. So they're extraordinary in that way. Colour, of course, so important to him, but amazingly, and I still haven't figured it out, so is black and white. He has these two extremes of working, which you can see in here. And always texture. Now, I said black and white. Shouldn't have said that. We might call them monochrome. He never did black and white. Look through all these paintings. It's not black and white. It is subtle admixtures of lights and darks. And when he does use black, you know about it. So normally, as you can see here, look at those fantastic gradations of greens. It's actually all green, that canvas, isn't it? And then set against this wonderful, there's a probably, red coming through those sort of the thick white paint. And so you've got cool colours against hot colours. Classic sort of 17th century painting techniques. And of course he painted the people he knew. Again, I'm got to be careful not to run on too long, but this is a knocker-up that he knew that did sort of cleaning work for his parents-in-law. And he sort of fell in love with this woman. She hated him, couldn't stand him, and thought the idea of doing paintings was a complete and utter waste of time. So he could only paint her from memory. And she was such a character that she became a national treasure when she appeared on What's My Line, that sort of Wilfred Pickles programme that ran for so many years in the 1950s and 60s. Well, if you look at that, you can see Rembrandt, can't you? I hope. You can see Van Gogh. You can see the directness of working, of conjuring up the presence of this woman, the terrible beauty, and this is key to Theo, the beauty of working people in the north is their terrible beauty. They are survivors. That is what gives them their strength, their character. And I find it difficult to talk about this photograph. There she is. Look at that. Isn't that? She's 64 years old. I'm 66, 66, isn't it? You know, wow, what a life. And Theo loved her. And yet, look at that look. It's beautiful, isn't it? Heartbreaking, heartbreaking. Anyway, there we go. And of course, there's the Rembrandt. He knows his Rembrandt. This guy knows his art history. Takes no notice of chronologies and all that sort of stuff. It's the power of individual works. And he was absolutely destroyed by the fact that two of the greatest Rembrandts were in Hague Hall, just a few miles away from where he lived. Could he see them? Could he Buxton? He never saw them. So no wonder he railed against collectors and people who bought pictures and hung them on their walls in gilded frames and such like. So we do have a complexity here that Theo had this thing about, you know, his work going out and never being seen by people. So there's the great Rembrandt, and Theo is up there. He's also showing in London. He's showing at the AIA, which is a socialist artists group in London. Lowry also showed there, so don't get too worried about the political side of things. But it was a sort of socialist artists group, and Theo is very much that way inclined. There we are. That was in Hague Hall. One of the greatest paintings in the world. I saw it about a year ago, and it just makes your heart weep. It's so beautiful. So obviously he really felt that private ownership of great art was a problem. Art should be for the people. But of course you can't do that. It just means your art isn't seen. So there's a wonderful thing running through Theo, this paradoxical desire to make his art for everybody, but then not allowing really people to see it, even though he opened his house to whoever might come at weekends. So there's those wonderful details of direct painting, which you can see here better than I can explain. And Theo's favourite painting. Again, it's her, Nellie Fairhurst. I did it, I'm from Liverpool, and I said Fairhurst instead of Fairhurst. So there we are, there's Nellie Fairhurst. And she's obviously, you know, she's Rembrandt, isn't she? He used to love the National Gallery Rembrandt room. He, you know, took people there and he waxed lyrical about the beauty of those paintings in a spiritual way. Well, his private life, I haven't got time to go there, but I came across this fantastic piece of writing that was in his archive, and it says there, wanted for income tax arrears and murder of mother-in-law. So very unfair, because actually I think his mother-in-law and father-in-law supported him in ways that aren't absolutely apparent. His wife, Kathleen, I haven't got time to talk about all this, which is a shame, but she supported him right from the beginning. And so Theo was able to concentrate on painting because his wife was working as a teacher in Ince. And she taught infants children, and she did something she couldn't do today. She gave him the photographs of the children, and he created amazing paintings of these extraordinary children, because for Theo, every child is extraordinary. Children are the future. Old people have lived their lives and suffered. It's the in-betweenies he hated. So, well, you know, people like us, perhaps, but old people and young people, that's who he was attracted to. And here you can see, there's the fantastic photograph that Kathleen gave him to paint from. And there are other photographs of her which show her smiling. But this one that she used, I think, is incredibly poignant. Then, of course, he's into the sort of paintings that we can see and we recognise by his style. He paints from 1946 onwards on hardboard, on the wrong side of hardboard. It's a solid, strong surface. He can kick around, overpaint and repaint. And he can use it in all kinds of ways, scraping down, repainting. And one of his major tools, of course, was a paint scraper. So when you look at these paintings, they're painted with his hands, fingers, brushes, rags, but also a paint scraper, where he scrapes down, repaints and overpaints. There you can see the solid construction that we see in almost every painting that's around here. Verticals and horizontals, creating a strong, unifying context, and then freewheeling within that, like a skater on an ice rink. Pushing the paint around, using diagonals, thick, wonderful impasto, and then places where he scraped it down and scratched into it. And fantastic. If you have one of these on your wall, you'll spend your life looking at the details and seeing the wonderful sea frenzy of paint, where you can imagine, it's fantastic sort of microcosm of the energies that exist beyond the painting. The clouds, the rain, the seasons, time, the sea, everything is there in these fantastic movements as he brings the painting together in this extraordinary fluid style. And these are some details that Martin sent me a couple of days ago. You can do it with any of these paintings. They're like listening to Mozart or Bach. You can listen to any fragment, and there you have the stuff of life, the rhythm, the DNA that makes us what we are. And he did it not in the south of France, he did it in Wigan. And Wigan is at the heart of his painting, as you can see. The hills, the houses, the construction is not Lancashire per se, it is that place. Lowry had a very different approach to his paintings, but the two of them only lived within 17 miles of each other. Two amazing artists in different ways, living so close. And some of you will see in these paintings, large pictures, belongs to Wigan. These are cries of despair as to what has happened to Wigan. It's about the destruction of Wigan, as has happened all over Britain, perhaps all over the world. As in the 60s and 70s, the planners moved in, rightly or wrongly, and knocked down streets, knocked down the slums, and built new houses, new dwellings, new transport systems. And this painting, this is added much later. He's painted this, and then he's painted that one figure. Very, very important painting. And of course, one only needs to think of people like George Orwell, but also Giacometti. It's very much in the time frame of the wanderer, the existentialist idea of who are we, what are we, how are we living. So what happens with Theo's work is that he painted directly, and sometimes, as we see here, it worked, but other times there were problems because of the ground that he used, which sometimes allowed the paintings to change over time. Here's a full photo, which I hope you'll see is, again, taking memory and creating these fantastic paintings, which are about human feeling. Lowry is not about human feelings. He hated people, didn't like people, and I should know. He really did not like people. He loved people individually, but not as a group. So with Lowry, you're standing back all the time. You're looking, as Ian McKellen said, from the other side of the street. Theo, you are not doing that. You're part of them. You're on the same level as them. And you are sort of wandering around as they wandered. Remember that idea of the door opening. When you look at a painting, you walk into the landscape. And these extraordinary townscapes. Townscapes that are Jungian. I've got his notes when he was teaching about these pictures. And he's talking about them as the journey of life. The water canal, the birth canal. So although he's painting Wigan, and some of you may recognise what parts of Wigan these paintings are based on, they are about the journey of life. They are about seeing life as a whole. He writes about what would happen if death came across and met you on the bridge. And interesting from other conversations we've had. Life and death happens in the city, happens in the town. And here that great mystery, and there are those chimneys that we recognise right from the very beginning of the lecture. He moved out of Wigan to Apley Bridge. And out of his window, his painting window, he could see more or less what we see out here. And for him and his family, Kathleen and Mary, this was paradise. End of story. Adam and Eve have found paradise. And he lived here and refused really to move from Appley Bridge and use this as a basis of his art. And when you know this landscape, as many of you will do, of course, you can see those subtleties of how it transposes into his paintings very clearly. But, fantastically, he mentions his favourite painting in the Walker Art Gallery in one of his notes, and it's this one. And it's very rarely on view, but actually, it's almost like you'd walk past it. But when you don't, isn't it beautiful? Those silvers which we see in his paintings here, and that single tree, standing firm, standing proud. Remember the Adam and Eve? That phallic tree, so to speak? That's us standing erect in the landscape. And his landscape is the landscape of here. It's not made up. When you look at his paintings, you can recognise the farms, the implements that we see scattered around, and the landscape reflected in the paintings, but transformed into paint. There's the energies that we see in the landscape, the sky making love to the land, the locking together. Things are not independent, things are not scattered and broken. Everything responds to everything else. And then we're into just look at these paintings. Fantastic, rich coloration. He sees himself as Van Gogh, and when the book comes out, this, I hope, will be made very clear. And he brings the south of France to Wigan in the way that Van Gogh brought Holland to the south of France. It's a wonderful symbiotic story of memory, relationships, and desire. So he wants to be Van Gogh, and he sees, like William Blake, the landscape transformed into fire, the energies that make the landscape. And he uses extraordinarily brilliant, there it is over there, amazing palette that you cannot believe. When I say has no quality control, he doesn't give a damn. You're not meant to use these colours together. Very few artists can do it. When Bonnard did it, Picasso called him a piddler in paint, because he'd go, bit of violet, oh my God, ooh. You know, and I love Bonnard. He doesn't. He gets his paint out and he throws it on, he scratches it, amazing. So there you see the riches. You've buttered cold toast, haven't you? You know what we're talking about. That wonderful plastering a wall, that fabulous sense of creating a surface that we see. And look at this thing here. What is it? It's a tree. Trees play a huge part in Theo's imagination. And you see it's quite threatening, reaching out to the house. Or is it embracing? What is it doing? And so there's the mystery again within this, of the lone traveller making his way across the landscape. And look at these details. Kicking around, hitting the hardboard, scratching down, and of course all this reacts to light. And Theo loved his paintings to be seen in natural light, so that they change over the hours of the day. Look at that. Can you imagine the decision making that's gone into that? It's like ploughing a field. It's like diving into water. These furrows and flows and currents of different temperatures and different resistances. Jackson Pollock, eat your heart out. You know, this is real powerful painting. And no matter how deep you go, no matter how you look and look, you get those fabulous textures. Here again, the same motif with a highly sort of sexualized tree there that you can see is, very powerful. So these themes, he's working through them, but they're all based on Appley Bridge. It's based on this part of the landscape, as you can see. And tremendous richnesses of texture that very few other artists that I've come across can handle. When you mix colours together, it goes to a dirty brown, doesn't it? Doesn't happen with him, doesn't happen with Van Gogh. Very few artists. That's his thumbnail, by the way. Cutting into the paint. And Van Gogh is always there. Theo, a prince of greys, but a king of colour. Fantastic. A manipulator of paint, the equal of anyone. Look at these fabulous paintings. As good as it gets. And of course, very psychologically rich things happening, especially here with the house, with that sort of threatening or welcoming or something branch of the tree jutting out into the property. Amazing. These are extraordinary pictures. He blows your head off. So all tie up together. Any theme you take, it's a whole. And they all reference back to art of the past. There's no sense in which this man is a fly-by-night. He knows his art history. He knows the painters and the myths and stories that help him. When his wife died, who'd supported him all his life and was a fantastic figure, he suddenly found himself painting these very erotic nudes. And eros means life, don't forget. And he writes to a friend of his, I don't know why, but I'm painting these extraordinary paintings. Trees and apples and naked women. And it's about, he's bringing Kathleen back to life through his art. An extraordinary and wonderful thing. And when you set him against people like Vlaminck and Matisse and Derain, French artists of the 20th century that I love and teach and write about, actually the passion, the energy isn't there. You know, it's something else is going on, which is wonderful. But when you think of the density of Theo's work, you know you're dealing with an extraordinary artist, always relating back to the landscape. And giving, he taught. He helped promote art, and he tried to get the enrichment through the community to make a new great art that was beyond categorization. And he used to meet on the first floor of the Crofters on a Monday night. Again, if you didn't have money, you didn't have to pay. And one of the people who went there was Ken Fleetwood, who designed fantastic dresses in London, and learnt so much from Theo's teaching, because I've got Theo's teaching notes, and it's very evident he learnt a lot. Down to London in 1950, he was headhunted by the Daily Mail and the Guardian to make cartoons, to become the cartoonist of two of the leading papers of the day. And he was offered lots of money, complete freedom, even to work from Appley Bridge, and he rejected it because he thought somehow it might compromise his art. Some of these cartoons are really funny. There's one about the election that was coming up, and you can see a guy putting a cross on the election leaflet, you know, the voting slip, and he's saying, well, I'm not voting for him for a kickoff. And he puts a big cross against the name. He could have been a fantastic, fantastic cartoonist. That's another story. But he gave it up and he turned away, making, you know, these about for a year or so, working for the Daily Mail and for the Guardian. He was in London, he saw the Festival of Britain, he saw William Blake exhibition, he saw Lowry, he did all kinds of things. But he drew from this plinth of the Nelson's column. So you get this great insight into him, you know, going down to London, should I do this? Should I become a London-based artist and meet all these people? Or do I become a hermit of the North? And he decided to become a hermit of the North, so to speak. One of the sketches, though, is beautiful. Here is a young girl, can you see, in Trafalgar Square, picking up a pigeon. Can you see her heart? Yeah. Isn't it beautiful? And that will become very important in the monster paintings. Well, very quickly, he tried to set up an independent pilgrimage around the northwest of England, trying to enthuse local art societies, just imagine this, local art societies, to join together and be inspired to create a renaissance of English art. And this is Lytham St Anne's 1953, and he's giving a talk. And in this talk, I've got the notes, and what he's saying is, all art critics should be taken into a field in Lancashire and shot. Then their bodies should be put in a mincer and ground down and used as fertiliser, and with a bit of luck on Lancashire soil, a new art will grow. No wonder the Lord Mayor is looking a bit, oh my God, what's he going to say? So Theo went around Chorley, he went around Lytham St Anne's, to Preston, Appley Bridge. He went all over the northwest for about 4 years, trying to set up this kind of community of art societies, which still exists today. But he withdrew from it, saying, as you will see here, due to lack of interest and support from my many so-called friends, I have decided never to exhibit my paintings again. Oh, what a drama queen. Well, you know, he felt it, but of course he did exhibit, and he did carry on painting. Here's a wonderful big painting, figure in industrial landscape, and you can see there William Blake, like Van Gogh, like Rembrandt, is right at the heart of all his paintings. This is the time John Berger comes up and says, you are a great artist, but you know, if you're going to be a great artist, you've got to go down to London. You can't stay up north. And of course he didn't do that. He stayed up north and therefore lost perhaps that, you know, international fame that may have come his way. And of course, when the Arts Council wanted to buy stuff, he sent them to Lowry. When collectors came, don't listen to this, Martin, when collectors come to buy works of art from him, he said, "What are you doing here? Do you think this is bloody Woolworths? Get out." So he had this kind of extraordinary feeling, which Lowry had as well, because paintings are like family, you know, sometimes you don't want to lose them. So when the Arts Council said, "We want to buy your work, but we don't like the idea of Wigan, you know, it's too specific," Theo kicked them out and then put Wigan into every single title. Well, there was more going on than I've just said, of course. The 1950s, the art world was changing. America was coming in, abstract painting, pop art was happening. A little bit later, David Hockney and everything. So Lowry and Theo and people fell out of fashion. Now, Lowry, for various interesting reasons, held on in there. But for most artists, like Theo and co, life became very difficult. It didn't stop him. He carried on painting. And his paintings become more and more sublime, more and more in the spirit of William Blake and Turner, as you can see in this fantastic painting, many times reworked in different ways, of the sun and a lonely, solitary figure. But go to Appley Bridge, look out this window, and like Van Gogh painting the south of France, like Turner painting Yorkshire, like Constable painting East Anglia, he's painting the earth he knows, the landscape he knows. But Blake is always there in the back of his mind, as you can see in this wonderful painting that's in the Whitworth Art Gallery. Well, Wigan Council buy this painting, and I still think they don't actually realise to this day that this painting is about working people, people who live in Wigan, being crucified because of the destruction of their town. So you can see there's the working man, and here is the wasteland that is happening as Wigan is being redeveloped. So the Wigan Crucifixion, extraordinary painting, not least because can you see the nature of the painting has changed because Theo has used dodgy substrate. He's used a dodgy glue size, and it means that the underpainting is coming through, which in a way adds to the mystery of it, adds to the excitement of it. And of course at that time, 1950s, crucifixions are in the air because we've got the bomb. Now Theo, I'm not quite sure that he belonged to CND. Certainly he met with them and all that. He was a pacifist and opposed to all kinds of violence. And so the H-bomb, the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and all that, absolutely changed his way of thinking. And so like Stanley Spencer, like so many people, he followed in the footsteps of Rembrandt, and this is in the Whitworth Art Gallery, and painted the crucifixion as a theme. He also went back to Van Gogh. The paintings he didn't mind selling so much were, of course, the flower paintings. But this one has been photographed at different times of day in homage to his desire that paintings should be seen at different times of day. And there you can see his evident love of Van Gogh. Well, look at the red chair, very important painting for Theo, the red chair. But here is another painting. You know, you shouldn't use orange, green, blue, yellow, ochre together in a painting. You know, this is really difficult, and yet he handles it all the time. These extraordinary mixtures. And all the time he talks about his still lives, he says it's about relationships. It's not about the objects, it's about relationships. And these are family portraits. So the still lives stand in for human beings. Think of Rembrandt, you know, think of Chardin. It's about the things we hold dear. Very ordinary things, but things that are most precious. And all this comes together in one of his greatest paintings, which is of his wife Kathleen, who's ill, and she's in that famous sort of pose that we find in Dürer, Melancholia. And there's Theo, let us say, and there's the family. You know, there's the kind of symbolism, and the empty chair, of course, is Theo's as well. But you don't need to say that. You don't need to think about those things. It's in the magic of the painting. This is a big painting about the size you see on the screen, and this bit there, can you see that wrist? There it is. So always the detail, the work, the magic. It's like a piece of music by Bach. It's like taking a section of a river flowing down to the sea, ever changing, ever moving. Fantastic. There's the painting. So imagine what all that is like. Well, you don't have to because you can see it in the paintings around here. And of course the pose is Dürer's Melancholia. He's painting his wife who is going to die. He knows that, you know, it's another story, but it's a very, very eloquent, elegiac and beautiful one. And Van Gogh again, you know, the portrait of Dr. Gachet, the melancholic man. And indeed, my wife Ghislaine, you know, self-pregnant. It's an archetypal pose that we see throughout history of art. And it's then repeated as death comes to call. And of course, for Theo, death is not the end. He wrote on a script, very simply, artists don't die. And they don't, because Theo is in this room with us right now. And he'd probably hate me, he'd probably kick me out of the room, that's another matter. But here he is in his paintings, the hand that painted these canvases. These are the traces of one man's life, given to us as a gift. And they sing out about what it is to be human, as in do the Ingmar Bergman's films, and the paintings that of people he loved so much. Well, I'm going to wrap up very shortly now, but of course, Hiroshima, the bomb, the war, the carrying on of the stupidity of aggression in this world that we see around us at this very moment. Theo's work has never, ever been more apposite than it is now. These things do not go away. The desire for a home, Appley Bridge, paradise, knowing that outside, think of Orwell and the miners, people are suffering. This is what made Theo's heart beat. And he decided at some stage, he didn't decide because he said paintings come from the unconscious. He started painting skeletons. And although when he describes what he's doing with those paintings, it changes. He thinks of skeletons not as dead figures resurrected, which they are, but as human beings stripped down to their essentials. So actually, for most of the time, we can think of these figures as you and me, every man, like Beckett, Samuel Beckett, or Chaucer, or Shakespeare. This is every man. This is what human beings do. As well as that, of course, there is the other side of it, which it gives it an extra edge. So these figures are wandering through a Wigan wasteland, and they start off as being terrifying figures. But amazingly, over a period of time, they become helpers. And you start seeing, as the narrative unfolds, and Theo's pictures should be seen as series, the skeletons begin to help people, help each other. And I'm very touched by this for various reasons. They take you away when it's time to go. So rather like some African mythology, death sometimes is a friend. And so sometimes when death comes, it's as a friend. So, and of course the skull, that's Theo, isn't it? Distinctive, that wonderful cranium. And he brings his wife back to life. And the women that he loves in his life, his carer, his wife, his daughter, are embedded and woven into these extraordinary paintings that he paints until he can paint no more. And you can see William Blake, you can see great sort of mythic energy in these paintings that take us back to Blake, take us back to Egyptian art, to Greek art, to all kinds of sources. And here is death leading a woman and Kathleen away, so to speak. There's Parbold down there. And although she is, you know, upset, don't forget this is a series of paintings. It's not one painting, it's a series. The series unfolds and you get to the end with a glorious resurrection with the birth of his grandchild. And the baby is thrown up into the air and life goes on. And of course for Theo, Kathleen never died. People don't die, they continue in a different form. He painted pictures of the bomb and crucifixion, and this one here, the atom bomb painting, 1961. And of course here is Anthony Gormley in Liverpool 30 years later, thinking he's invented something. And he hasn't responded to my letter saying, oh, do you know? And he hasn't written back. And of course, Theo's seascapes, like Lowry's, perhaps the best things he did. Perhaps, I don't know. They're just amazing. Thin veils of paint. And there's, look, that's a detail. Just amazing. And solid paintings are used all the time, a bit like the chair painting, a bit like, again, every artist feeds off other artists, Ghislaine and Theo, this wonderful symbiotic relationship. And then, as I said, this kind of, he knows John Berger, he's read Ways of Seeing, that sense of entering into other people's lives, trying to see women not as men see them, but as women might feel themselves to be. Very interesting, especially in today's climate, of realizing how important gender fluidity is. The binary notions of men and women, male and female, simply do not exist. We sort of flow together in different ways. So here is that complex attempt to enter into this extraordinary celebration of what he sees women as being. And compare it with Picasso, and you can see, this is violent and ugly, a crucifixion. With Theo, it's a dance. And here is a kind of death taking the maiden, so to speak. And here perhaps is perhaps the last painting, because I don't want to go any longer, I've gone on far too long as it is. But here is perhaps the last painting we'll show. And here is that end of a series where, from painting the skeletons, from suffering terrible illness throughout his life, from feeling disparaged, from feeling, even though he had lots of admirers, that his art wasn't really appreciated, but having the strength all the time, as hopefully we all have, to follow his own dream, he carried on painting. And those skeleton paintings come to a head. Life resurrects itself. Life carries on. The flowers will grow. The trees will spring new leaves. And here we see on the right-hand side a young woman holding up a baby. And there in the middle, of course, like Edvard Munch, a woman personified as young and dynamic and vital. And there, death, Theo, perhaps, or just another human being looking on, showing whatever, but suggesting through these extraordinary off-the-wall paintings the dynamic of living a life and a full-blooded immersion in all that life has to offer. And that is the power of Theo. We end where we began. Theo loved life, saw it as interconnected, and something that continues. And as we've seen happening in Wigan today, long may it live, and long may Theo have his place within that. Thank you very much.